What is the libertarian solution to the coronavirus crisis? Why, libertarianism, of course. Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's segment of the Libertarian Angle as we examine why this is so. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, and I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another week of Libertarian Angle.
Yes, it's good to be back with you, our viewers and listeners, in these, dare I say, somewhat interesting times.
Yeah, they are interesting, and if you're new to the Future of Freedom Foundation, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Come to fff.org. We've got 30 years of articles presenting the principal case for liberty, which raises these interesting times and what we were saying 30 years ago when we started FFF. Richard, you'll recall that you were vice president of academic affairs. You were helping me get this little foundation off the ground in 1989. We started publishing our monthly journal that was called Freedom Daily at that time and now called Future of Freedom. And we were presenting a case there for liberty that a lot of people thought was just too radical. And of course, in the 90s and then the 2000s, that was a standard response that I would get. Boy, Jacob, you're just too extreme. You're just too radical in what you're doing. And so what they were essentially saying is, look, we've got this centrally planned and controlled economic system, centrally planned and controlled healthcare system, centrally planned and controlled monetary system. And so what you really need to do, Jacob, and the Future of Freedom Foundation is just come up with reforms on how to make this system work. Same thing with education. And of course, we always resisted that. You know, the idea that I always hewed to was that there is no way to make this system work. When you've got an inherently defective system, central planning, socialism, interventionism, regulation, it's all an inherently defective system. And that using reform under the libertarian rubric is not going to accomplish anything. If anything, it's just going to damage the libertarian brand. That libertarianism entails an entirely different system in all these areas. So, for example, in 1990, we were calling for a total free market healthcare system, one that was totally independent of government control, including the abolition of Medicare and Medicaid, and medical licensure as well. Just a separation of healthcare in the state the same way our ancestors separated church and state. No more mandatory charity and no more income taxes and that funds all this junk, including the warfare state, the national security state, the CIA, the Pentagon, the vast military empire, the NSA. So people would be free to keep everything they earn, and they decide what to do with it. A limited government republic with a basic military force. The dismantling of virtually almost all of the 15 departments of the government: agriculture, labor, commerce, education, energy, and so many others. Of course, separation of school and state, but the separation of money in the state, where you have a free market monetary system, no more Federal Reserve. All right, so okay, some people listened to us, they kept us going, but nothing happened with respect to society under which we live, which is this state, what we call a statist society, where government controls and manages all these areas. So now today we have this perfect storm. We have people that don't have any savings because the IRS has plundered and looted them for 30 years now. The young people, they can't afford to lose a month's worth of work. They don't have the savings, the nest egg in there. You've got this centrally managed healthcare system that looks to the government for control, direction, and orders. And you've got government officials running around like chickens with their head cut off. The only thing they know is how to destroy liberty, how to impose a tyrannical tyrannical system on society whenever there's an emergency. I mean, there was a reason why the framers didn't include an emergency exception in the Bill of Rights, because they knew that emergencies are when freedom's destroyed, because people are so scared. They're saying, take away my freedom to keep me safe. Much like, chickens turning to the fox saying, here, we'll surrender our lives to you and our liberties, Mr. Fox, because we know you're going to keep us safe temporarily here. Well, imagine, Richard, if we had prevailed 30 years ago. No income tax, no IRS. People keep everything they earn. Let's say that people pay an average of $25,000 a year in taxes, income taxes. And that may be a low estimate. But 25 times 30 years, what's that, like $700,000, $800,000 that people would have in their bank accounts? I mean, that's a nice, sizable nest egg in case you lose your job. We would have a dynamic healthcare system where we would be that would be independent of government control. We would be looking to the healthcare industry with this pandemic. I mean, bad things happen in life. We know that. Life is not a paradise, every day of your life. Crises hit. But I would much prefer to be living under a system where healthcare providers, doctors, physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners are all guiding us, saying this is what we need to do, and then a dynamic free market system that's producing test kits and masks and sanitizers and so forth, instead of this centrally controlled and managed system, and then a monetary system that's based on sound money rather than this system where they're lowering interest rates now to zero. They've been inflating this bubble since 2008. And when this thing finally grabs on, we know what the result is going to be is massive price increases, more debasement of the currency, more plundering and looting people through this arbitrary, capricious, surreptitious way of taxation. So if we had prevailed, Richard, libertarianism, we'd be in a whole different situation today facing this crisis. Instead, people look at us and say, well, what's your libertarian solution to this? Well, libertarianism has never been purported to be a philosophy that is designed to fix the problems of socialism and statism. Our solution, adopt our system, okay? We can do it right now. Adopt libertarianism. Get rid of all this crud that you've got of socialism and interventionism. And then, 5 years from now, people will say, Jacob, now we know when the next pandemic hits, now we understand why you were saying that libertarianism is the answer to these solutions. But libertarianism is a radical philosophy, and what we need to do, Richard, is look to the long term here and embrace libertarianism, adopt libertarianism, and acknowledge that this status system has been a total fiasco for this country, and the best fruits of it are this perfect storm of statism today. What do you think?
Well, let's sort of look at this through several steps in this crisis. It's often said that two things sell in the world of advertising: greed and fear. Now, greed can take the form of wanting to just improve yourself, but the market requires you to serve others. Or greed, that is a desire for more of things that you want, can be done through the political means. That is, to what Frederick Bastiat says, resort to legalized plunder, where you use the power of government to transfer other people's wealth and income to yourself when you could not get them to voluntarily trade or associate or contribute to a cause that you're advocating. And fear. When fear occurs, such as in a panic, people become very concerned about their life, their family, their friends, their financial stability. And that easily plays into the demagogy of a lot of people. We see this today. So let's sort of like look at these in a few parts. We now have this coronavirus, which is relatively new. Science, those in the science field, the biologists, and so on, the medical profession, they don't know all of its properties. They don't know whether it will follow the normal cycle that flu viruses do, or whether it will be more intensive or less intensive. But the politicians, the media, the social pundits have all hyped this up as the end of the world. The fact is, the flu hits the world every year in its various strains, and it brings down millions of people who have the symptoms, and often tens of thousands of people die from the flu. Now, if that affects you or a friend or a loved one, that's a great tragedy. But unfortunately, in the cycles of the biosphere that is the world, these viruses do plague us on a regular annual basis, and medicine tries to find cures and ways to ameliorate it. But the fact is, nature takes its toll on us, and tens of thousands of people die. And because we take this, unfortunately, for granted, we try to use a lot of prophylactics and preventatives in our personal lives, in various social settings. But we have learned to adapt and adjust and accept this until medicine and scientific research can ameliorate these things and bring down those terrible human tolls. Now, this coronavirus comes along, and it seems to have, as I said, these different or unique properties as to what its pattern of acceleration and deceleration will be. And it is enveloping good parts of the world relatively quickly. We see this in China, we see this in Italy and Spain. And then people get so concerned with the way it's presented to them that there's absolute panic mode. Now, I would not want a friend or a family member, a loved one, to be struck down by this, either with severe symptoms or in certain age groups to pass away. But this is now feeding into a dangerous mentality. And that is that the only solution to this panic, which is being classified as somehow different and unique, of just not of kind, but of quality, that there's only one answer and solution to this, and this is government. And we see the politicians and the bureaucrats and those part of the scientific community tied to the government, the CDC, the FDA. What are they coming up with? We have to regulate, we have to control, we have to command, we have to restrict, we have to prohibit. We have to basically plan what's going on in society. Now, we could talk about, as you were suggesting, the aspects of human liberty. Should the state, even in a natural emergency such as a severe possible pandemic as they're defining it, should it have the responsibility and the power to intrude in our personal freedoms the way and to the extent that they're doing? But separate from that ethical and moral aspect of the basic principles and practicing of a free society, what are the economic and institutional implications of this? If you want to say principle versus, utilitarian analysis, what are the utilitarian implications of this? Virtually everything that the government has chosen to do in the realm of the economy is going to make the human condition far worse. They're going to exacerbate the problem. What do I mean by this? We see around us all these fears that people are out shopping. They're looking for toilet paper. They're looking for these hand sanitizers. They're looking for paper towels. They're looking for certain essential canned goods that can have long a storage life in their cupboard. And now there's all the concern because of the demand being greater than the normal flows on everyday purchases. Inventories are slowing down. They need to be restocked. Production has to be geared up. What is the government's response to this? We're going to tell people not to go to work, and we're going to tell them to stay home and not buy things. And then the government is surprised that when they tell people not to go to work by either social pressure or increasingly by command now, in San Francisco, they've basically locked down millions of people in their homes. This is being proposed by the mayor of New York for another 8 million people on the eastern seaboard. So when you tell people not to go to work, don't be surprised that there's no goods coming down the pipeline into the stores. When you tell people not to go out, don't be surprised that those who both supply the goods and services and the wide variety of services to us certainly now seeing fallen profits, reduced revenues, and the tragedy of having to let workers off, not because a boss is an immoral and insensitive ogre, but most companies in the service sectors of the economy work on very small profit margins. You stop or slow that down, and there is not the revenue coming in to sustain the wages for employees without that company going completely and permanently under. Workers have to be furloughed, laid off, some let go. But this is all due to these government controls and restrictions. This is one size fits all through a government straitjacket. And the inability of the market to respond to this. The media, including even the mainstream press such as the New York Times, have highlighted that how FDA rules and regulations and CDA procedures and rules prevented individuals or decentralized at state levels the development of new testing techniques, the ability to manufacture these face masks, the ability to even provide the manufacture of certain sanitary items that people want to use. Everything has to be centrally planned in a straitjacket of one size fits all with their permission, their approval, in their ways of doing things, rather than allowing, as free market economists like Friedrich Hayek have always emphasized, decentralized decision-making in all the corners of the market where the little bit of knowledge belongs in each of our minds, and to give us the latitude and liberty to devise ways in new circumstances. How can we do it quicker? How can we do it better? How can we get it less expensively? How can we increase the amount of it in a short period of time? And how do you let people respond to this? By the signals of the market prices. But what is the government talking about? Price gouging. It's unfair. It's unjust. What we need more than anything right now is to leave people alone in the marketplace. Let them decide. Let them choose. If there's a huge demand for certain products right now, let those price signals and profits act as the inducement and the incentive for both businesses and resources to flow into those sectors of the economy. But what about the concerns about social closeness in the workplace? There are always trade-offs. Those sectors of the economy where demand is not as intense, as demonstrated by the changing patterns of market prices, might decide the cost-benefit trade-off, let some workers off, it's not worth taking a risk. Those other sectors of the economy where the demand is intense, and that's reflected in the price demands of consumers, then you tell employees, look, it could be caught and there are problems, but there's a trade-off, time and a half, double time. We'll offer it to you, and we'll try to make it as sanitary condition as we can in the workplace, but because that's where the demand is demonstrated by the things that people want now. If you choose to not work overtime or you want some time off, we're going to understand. But we're going to allow the price system of wages to let you decide what cost-benefit risk you want to take to be able to get extra income for your own family in this situation, but to also therefore be servicing those sectors of the economy where the demand has now suddenly become intense because of these concerns. Adapting, adjusting, people using all of their localized and special and unique knowledge to serve their fellow man through the market process of supply and demand and the price signals of competition. Is that what government is allowing us to do, Jacob? May I suggest just the opposite? Restrict, control, command, guide, dictate, prohibit. This will make this an even worse situation. And then, if I can just want to mention one other thing. What are they proposing to help all these people who will now be in financial straits? You tell people to stay home, no income. You tell people to stay at home. Service sectors are not earning the revenues that enable them to stay in business. What is the government's answer to this? Just run budget deficits and print money. Paper money does not create real goods and services. Yes, you can give paper money to people, and some person whose income has gone down or is because he's let off is not there right now. Yeah, you can just give him paper money so he can pay his mortgage payment or his landlord. But that is not making the system work. That's the illusion of continuity of normal conditions and prosperity. If you tell people not to produce and fewer goods start coming onto the market, and you're just printing money in some virtual sense to give people the illusion that they have the means to maintain their expenses and their budgets, more money chasing fewer goods, that's the most elementary explanation of the worst of inflation. Too much money chasing not just too few goods, but increasingly fewer goods, other than the ones the government tries to centrally command with the imposition of a top-down approach. This is setting us up for a disaster. We are already facing in this country an anticipated $1 trillion federal government budget deficit. That was before this crisis. Now they're talking about government additional spending of $850 billion. That money doesn't come out of air. They either tax, they borrow, or they print. Well, they're not going to tax because they must want to even give you some of what they've already taxed you to give you back in supposedly these $1,000 a person handouts. So then they borrow. But what are they borrowing? The savings is narrow. The resources to do things with is being reduced. So that means just the printing press. And that sets the stage for serious price inflation. And then what will be the response? Oh, businessmen are greedy. The production is sluggish or slowing down, and they want even higher and higher prices. Nationwide price gouging, price controls. Then what do you have? What the German free market economist Wilhelm Röpke called repressed inflation. The money is putting pressure on prices as a whole because of the printing press, and what is the government response? To impose price controls. So the price system can't even at least reflect what the real demands are at these rising prices. And that creates bottlenecks, shortages, unavailabilities, unwanted surpluses in various sectors of the economy because people are not able to adapt and adjust. And then what does government have to do? Ration, restrict, command. If I can just give one more example of this, those of us who are old enough will remember price controls in the early 1970s, especially during that energy crisis when OPEC imposed a supply embargo. And a Republican president, Richard Milhouse Nixon, imposed price controls, which ran into the Ford administration. And what happened? Well, prices couldn't reflect the changing patterns of people where people were working and vacationing in terms of needing gasoline to drive and go places. So you had unnecessary surpluses here, you had vast surpluses, shortages there, and long lines at the pump. I remember this. I was in my 20s at the time. And all we're setting ourselves up for is a nationwide catastrophe that will make that look like nothing in comparison.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points. Your point about letting the market determine who goes to work and who doesn't is really a fascinating one. Because if you had a dynamic healthcare system, one that wasn't centrally controlled and managed, you could also envision employers having a multiplicity of testing kits that says, okay, if you want to get double time or triple time to come and work, we'll pay you that. And, we're going to have everybody go through a test regularly here that are coming to work to keep everybody safe.
Right.
And then your point about the speculators, or the so-called price gougers is great too. I mean, I read an article about a guy that he bought up a bunch of hand sanitizers and toilet paper and stuff and planned to sell them at exorbitant prices. And now they're going after him. They're vilifying him. They're threatening to prosecute him. To the extent that the guy is just so overwhelmed, I think he's decided to just donate it. But you'll recall, Richard, that article by Victor Niederhofer, a New York libertarian in the Wall Street Journal many years ago, called "The Speculator as Hero." And it was in the Wall Street Journal. You can find it online. It's just a great article that these people are heroes, the speculators. They're buying low. They're preserving these resources, and then they're selling high. They're sending a signal to people saying, time to conserve, time to conserve. That if you keep prices low, people don't conserve. They go out and waste the water or they waste the hand sanitizer. But the speculator is saying, okay, I'm selling these to you at a higher price, but it's to your benefit here. And that gets entrepreneurs and suppliers in there. They see the higher prices, the higher profits. They increase production of that particular item, and all of a sudden prices start to drop. But this is the intricacies of the price system that they destroy with their price gouging laws and their price controls and so forth. Overall, I think it's important to just keep in mind that you're dealing with a very defective system, this centrally controlled system. You see that in monetary affairs, as you pointed out. What are they doing here? They're flooding the economy with this cheap money. They're talking about giving everybody $5,000 free money. Like, where does this money come from? The government doesn't have any resources of its own. It's not like a private industry like, Microsoft or something. The only place that it gets its money is from the taxpayer. So, okay, let's say they want to give you $5,000. So what do they say? Well, Richard, we need to get the $5,000, so we're going to tax you $5,000 in order to give you back $5,000. Ridiculous. Now, and of course, they have to deduct some of it to pay the IRS agents and the redistributive officers. So you end up getting $4,500 when you're taxed $5,000. Well, that's obviously so ludicrous. So what they make it look like, well, we're going to take it from somebody else, not from you. We're always going to take it from somebody else. And so you have this Bastiat concept, Frederick Bastiat, when he said, the state is the great fiction by which everyone is trying to live at the expense of everyone else. So that's one method of direct taxation to fund this free money. But as you point out, they don't resort to that system because it's so ludicrous. They say, we'll print the money. And you see the statists are now calling for this, saying print the money up and just deposit it in people's accounts. Well, what's the difference does it make whether, let's say somebody has to pay their rent payment of $500 a month and they get this extra money if rent goes up to $600 a month, which is exactly what's going to happen because this monetary inflation has to reflect itself in terms of higher prices. There's no other way to reflect the devaluation of money than higher prices across the board. Now, some people benefit because they get the money first, but overall, you end up with this massive price inflation. And then as you point out, the politicians start acting like inflation is this independent phenomenon that has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. You remember Gerald Ford, as you mentioned, who succeeded Nixon, his Whip Inflation Now campaign. We all have to band together to whip inflation now. As if inflation's like the coronavirus or something. It's caused by the government. And you end up with this price control scheme. I mean, everything they're doing, as you point out, is antithetical to the best interests of the people, antithetical to liberty, antithetical to the heritage of economic liberty that this country was founded on. Everything they're moving is going in a bad direction. And that's precisely because they have an inherently defective system of central management with respect to income and wealth, central management of healthcare, central management of the monetary sphere, and of course, central planning of education, which is a totally different subject.
It's very important to run against this tide, Jacob. For decades, the educational system, the mainstream media, many in the intellectual community, have all fostered and cultivated this statist and collectivist attitude that the individual by himself is incompetent to successfully manage, regulate, and direct his own life, and that the activities of the marketplace are okay in limited and normal and stable conditions. But whenever there are any type of serious social and community or national-wide problems, only government can direct. You need the paternalistic state. The government has the knowledge, wisdom, and ability. And notice the reification there, the government, as if it's a real live entity. Government is nothing more than an institution in which certain people have either been elected or appointed, who are just like you and me. They get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, they brush their teeth, they put on their clothes, and then they get into an argument with their spouse over the breakfast was overcooked or who's going to take out the dog, and forgetting to get the dry cleaning at the end of the day while they're driving home, and just like you and me. But when they get to their offices, their appointed offices in the White House, or their offices at the congressional headquarters in D.C., or in their bureaucratic agencies, suddenly these become like Zeus-like demigods on Mount Olympus. We know, we can plan, we can control. This is nothing more than the person next door or the person down the street. They're just like us. Now, I want to just express this in one other way. We all have our own political points of views and our perspectives. But invariably, there's always things that government does that we don't particularly like, or we're suspicious or doubtful of, somewhere along the political spectrum. I would just ask anyone to answer the following question. Imagine government having all of this control and authority, not just in normal times, but in this accelerated fashion now in this emergency. Now think of the politician who you dislike the most and trust the least, and imagine them in charge. Have a nice day. Okay, this you cannot separate it from real human beings, and no matter who in sort of a mainstream perspective, whoever you think would be a good candidate, a good president, a good congressman, elections come and go, appointments come and go, fads and fashions politically come and go. Once the institutional structures are there and the power is given to them, you can never be sure that the person that you like and you trust will be there. It could be that person who you hate the most and trust the least, and they have the levers of control over your life.
On that sobering note, we're out of time, Richard. I would say a parting comment is, when we're hit with these vicissitudes in life, tyranny is not the answer. Always liberty and free markets are the answer. So enjoyed the conversation, Richard. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this subject again, and look forward to talking to you next week. And again, subscribe to our YouTube channel and come and visit us at fff.org. And thanks for your great support.